Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Josh Williams and I'm joined by, as ever, David Hughes. Dave, how's things?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you, mate. I'm enjoying the sunshine. I don't know if it's the same for people listening at home, but it's been fantastic for us at least.
Yeah, it's sunny in Liverpool as well for once. Getting used to it, but are you excited for the Euros, Dave?
I am actually, yeah. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest patriot. Is that the right term? I'm not the biggest of England fans. I'm not against them either. But I obviously prefer club football. But when it comes to the international tournaments, they're really exciting, and I can't wait, to be honest. There's so many more games this time around as well. Initially, I was against that, but now it's here, I'm thinking, yeah, I'll take those extra matches, and I'm really looking forward to it. Are you?
No, I'm looking forward to it myself, and that is the theme of today's podcast. Actually, I think I'm right in saying this is the first Analysing Anfield that has taken place during a major international tournament when it comes to either the Euros or the World Cup. I think this might be the first. So obviously it's a Liverpool podcast. We'll try to come back to Liverpool as much as we possibly can, but at the end of the day, it is quiet on the club side of things. So we're going to go through the Euros. We're going to go through the group stages. And a few weeks ago, we had a scouting picks episode where me and Dave just picked players that we wanted to flag, basically, who looked interesting. We're going to do that again, but with a Euro theme. We're going to go group by group. I'm going to pick 2 players per group. Dave's going to pick 2 players per group. As usual, we don't know each other's picks. I assume there'll be a fair few crossovers. But yeah, that's the theme of today's episode. Hopefully get you in the mood for the Euros, and we will tie whatever back to Liverpool whenever we can. So, Dave, if you don't know, you're going to start with Group A.
Group A, yeah.
Yeah, we'll start with Group A. And Group A consists of Italy, Switzerland, Turkey, and Wales. I'll let you go first, mate.
Yeah, it's quite an open group, that one, isn't it? I know Italy's been in fantastic form, but the other 3 sides, I think Turkey have been doing quite well as well, actually. Might seem like a cop out. I apologise, but I've gone quite straightforward initially, looking at Italy, and I've gone with a player who may ring a bell for you, Josh, because we've either talked about him on another podcast. I'm sure we've spoken about him. I think I've written about him as well. And that's Manuel Locatelli at Sassuolo, midfielder. He was at AC Milan initially. Went out on loan to Sassuolo and done so well that they signed him. It was either the summer just gone or the summer before. But he's 23, included in the Italy squad. I think he may only have the 10 caps to his name, but he's been doing some really good stuff in Serie A. He's a midfielder, very much a traditional box-to-box midfielder. He does good work both with and without the ball. Certainly, I haven't looked at his numbers ahead of the show, but I know when I was looking last year, he seemed to show fairly well in terms of things like defensive duels, interceptions, but also quite progressive with the ball at his feet. He seems to dictate play, and obviously Italy are more possession-based under Roberto Mancini now. So whilst I don't expect them to play every game because they've got a really strong side, it will be interesting to see how he performs when he comes into the team, because there are rumours that other clubs are in for him. The biggest is Juventus. I'm not sure there's some Premier League sides in there. Whether he'd be good enough to be a midfielder in Liverpool, I'm not too sure. I'd like to see him in another division first, but he's just someone I think people should keep an eye on if he gets on the pitch.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of hype around him a few years back. I think maybe it's gone a little bit quieter. I'm not sure exactly what's happened there with him. I don't think he's had any kind of decline like that, but I do remember when he emerged at AC Milan, him being really, really talked up. And for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to happen as much nowadays. But yeah, definitely a player worth flagging. So I've went to Switzerland, and I'm sticking with the Liverpool theme with this one. So I've went for Denis Zakaria. Might have mentioned him previously on this podcast, to be honest, a few years back. But the reason I mention him, even though he's a player that I will mention now, actually, with this being the Euros, it was difficult, wasn't it, Dave, to pick out only players who nobody will have heard of. You know, a lot of them are well known sort of thing. So hence the reason why they're called up to international duty to represent the countries in a major tournament. So some of the names you will know. It's not going to be like the scouting picks from a few weeks back, maybe. But yeah, Denis Zakaria, linked with Liverpool in the past. I think I'm led to believe Liverpool actually tried to sign him at his previous club when he was at Young Boys in Switzerland. But didn't end up happening. I think around that time, Liverpool ended up signing Wijnaldum, maybe a little bit earlier. And a year later, he moved to Mönchengladbach for about 10 million. But just the type of midfielder that just looks like he'd cope in English football, like he'd cope in the Premier League. Really tall, about 6'3", I think. Good on the ball, quite reliable. You'd keep him behind the ball most of the time. I think he'd be good as like a bit of a presence to regain the ball and allow others around him to take risks. But then, given his height and stuff like that, maybe he'd be useful from set pieces and things. But yeah, I think given that he was linked with Liverpool in the past, and the fact I think he's still only 24 years old, he has been linked with a move back to England a few times. Manchester United have been in there. He is still 24, yeah. So we might see him in England sometime soon, still at Mönchengladbach. But he was my first shout because I think he'll probably be a starter for Switzerland, and as I said, he might be moved to England on the cards in the future for him.
Yeah. I'm glad you caveated before you talked about him there that the fact that there is going to be names that everybody knows because everybody should know this player now. Although, again, what I will say is, Josh, I'm pretty sure that scouting episode last year we might have talked about him, and that Federico Chiesa at Juventus. Obviously, he's on loan from Fiorentina, which is quite bizarre. I don't know what the kind of dynamics behind that are. But Serie A does tend to throw up stuff like that.
I was going to say, it's a strange league.
Yeah, it's very strange. Little things like you can even, lone players can play against the parent clubs there, I'm sure, which is I've always found very strange. But look, really good player. Still just 23. Feels like he's been around now for a couple of years, but obviously I think he's predominantly being used as like a wide attacker. When we talked about him last year, I think there was talk of maybe because of his technical ability that he could be like a Firmino type. I think on reflection, I might have been pushing the boat out a bit with that. Might be a bit of a pipe dream that, but he can play through the middle and as a forward. So who knows? But yeah, the reason I'm flagging is because he's had another good campaign. I think he scored maybe something like 15 goals this year, and I just think it's a big tournament against one of the top sides in the competition. I think he could really go up a level, make himself a bit of a superstar if he performs well over the next few weeks. So that's why I've flagged him as a player that we should keep an eye on. Yeah,
I've gone down a bit more of an obscure route with this one, and the only reason I'm flagging him really is because I've wrote about him in the past. So difficult name to pronounce, certainly his first name, but it is Abdulkadir Omur or Omur. Turkish, plays for Trabzonspor. But the reason I'm flagging him is because he was linked with Liverpool. He was fairly strongly linked with Liverpool a few seasons ago. And I got asked to look at him to determine why for the Echo, I think it might have been. And I couldn't tell you because I don't think he didn't show up as a Liverpool level by any means. And at the same time, he was linked with Newcastle. And there's a bit of a different level there between Liverpool and Newcastle. He didn't end up coming to the Premier League. Maybe it was agent talk, but he's still only 21 years old. He is a nice player to watch. He's quite tricky, very small, really agile, left-footed, and his contract expires next summer as well. So, again, probably a move could be on the horizon. Whether it'll be to the Premier League, I would maybe doubt, just largely because of his physicality, really. To be honest, Dave, if I was to describe him, he's a number 10 type-ish. So if I was to compare him to a player, it would probably be Bernard at Everton.
I'm not sure if that's a compliment or.
Well, he's a good of both. Really?
Yeah, because obviously Bernard's a good technical player, isn't he? We both agree with that. He just maybe lacks the output. I don't know if you throw him in the same bracket as that or.
Yeah, he's definitely that. As I said, he's small, agile, really tricky, good on the ball, plays in offensive areas, but then doesn't really have a lot of output to his game and doesn't have physicality to his game. So I think he's got the same strengths and the same weaknesses as Bernard, but maybe I wouldn't say he's as technically good as Bernard. I think Bernard gets by, doesn't he, because of his close control and stuff. But I think this lad, decent on that side, but maybe not to a Brazilian level. But yeah, keep an eye on him because if he plays for Turkey, I'm not sure if he's a starter for them. But he's that kind of tricky attacker that does look good on paper. But when it comes to actually making a signing for him and playing him in a attacking position, maybe he doesn't retain that much. But as I said, 2 players there for me in Group A that have both been linked with Liverpool in the past. Some justifiably so, the other not so much. So when it comes to Group B then, Dave, we have Belgium, Denmark, Finland and Russia.
I must admit I was a little bit lopsided in this in terms of players I was looking at. Initially going in, when I've kind of been looking at the Euros in general, going over the last couple of weeks, I expected Belgium to be a team I looked at a lot. And there is one player that we talked about, Doku, last week. I would have liked to talk about him in this situation, but I feel like since we've done that last week, it's probably not fair to do it again for those who do listen week in, week out. So I had the gander at Denmark because, they've got, within the kind of analysis scene, a lot of people are bigging up Denmark and they look like they're bringing in some really good technical players. And I've gone with one of the lesser established names, or one of the ones getting the less traction, and that's Mikkel Damsgaard at Sampdoria. On paper, it doesn't look like he's done anything too remarkable there. I'll tell you why I like him. He's not playing week in, week out because he's only 20 years old, but he played about 1,900 minutes last season, hardly as a starter, still contributed 2 goals, 4 assists. But he was recruited from Nordsjælland, now FC Nordsjælland, and I just feel like for me, they're the side. We have these teams that we like, don't we? Who we think if a player is coming from that side, the chances are they've got good prospects of being a really good player because these clubs recruit well. You'd say, you probably, in terms of the Premier League, you'd probably put Brighton in that bracket. Over in France, maybe like Lille, and then obviously you've got like the Red Bull group, Leipzig, Salzburg, and then I put FC Nordsjælland in there as well. And he made a move from there. I think it was only last summer, so it was his first season in Serie A, and he's had a half decent input into the squad. He's done quite well, and he's obviously gone to the Euros. If he can impress in the Euros, if he gets some game time and does well, then he could be a player who's set for a bright future.
Yeah, I think he might be a new one for me. I'm not sure if I've come across that.
There'll be a few of them, to be honest with you. I think
yeah.
I think if anyone sees me going sheepish when Josh mentions a name, chances are I don't know who it is.
One thing I was going to mention actually regarding Jeremy Doku, who you didn't talk about this time around. He's actually, if you look at the Belgium squad, he's the only player that's been selected who's under the age of 24. Everybody else is over 24. So I suppose above everything, really, that probably highlights his level, really, doesn't it? I mean, if Roberto Martinez has picked a gang of players who are ready to just win right now, but he's picked, is he 19, Dave?
18, I think.
18-year-old, yeah. So, yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on. But for me, I have...
Oh, no, he is 19. Sorry, he's just turned 19, apologies, in the last few days.
Yeah, okay. So I've picked a lad who I've been aware of for a while. I just think he looks like a good player, good, reliable right-back. Joakim Maehle, or Joakim Maehle. Surname is spelt Maehle. As I said, he's a right back, 24 years old now, Danish, plays for Denmark. And he played against Liverpool, I think, earlier in the season in the Champions League for Genk. I think it was Genk. It have been was that even this season or last season? It's hard to even remember now. But he moved in January just gone, to Atalanta, who we know play very good football, for about 10 million. And he's just a player. I'm not sure how I became aware of him, but he just looks like a reliable, decent right back who's fairly well rounded, good crosser of the ball, no real major weaknesses. As I said, just kind of like a solid 6, 7 out of 10 in virtually every department. I think he's good size and things. He's played a few minutes in midfield as well as a right back. I think he's played the right side of midfield as well. But anyone who's looking for a right back, maybe it's a bit difficult now considering he moved in January to Atalanta. But he just looks like a player who looks decent. And around the time when specifically Aston Villa were signing quite a few players from Belgium, they signed Samata from Belgium. They signed Wesley, I think, came from Belgium. 1 or 2 others maybe. I thought they were maybe going to look at Maehle. Hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right there, by the way. That's a complete guess because it's a tough one, that. But yeah, he's a lad who probably won't let the tournaments up, considering his position and stuff, but he's just kind of that reliable presence that I think will probably start for Denmark, probably play throughout, and probably won't put a foot wrong. Again, decent transfer move for someone, but looks like Atalanta have got in there first.
My next player is actually a player that does play his trade in England, albeit the second tier, and that's Marcus Forss at Brentford. Again, I was just talking about. Go on,
not
sorry.
Second tier no more then.
Well, no, yeah, good point actually, and now a new Premier League side, so we may see this player in the Premier League next season. He's 6 foot, 21 years old. Now, I was talking about clubs that kind of do really well in terms of recruitment. I didn't mention Brentford, but I probably should have, because we know that they're the club that really pushed for those marginal gains, and it was kind of a success for them to get promoted, given how they've done it over the past few years. He didn't play a ton last season, Josh, but I suppose we can understand that given what they've got up top. Brentford, obviously, Ivan Toney's up there, isn't he? And he scored. Did he score the most goals in the Championship ever? Was it?
I think he broke the record. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think about to score as many as he did, it means he's obviously playing a lot of football. He's in fine form. It's difficult to dislodge him. But Brentford brought him in. He went out on loan with Wimbledon the season before last. Come in this season, and as I said, he's only played 1,400 minutes. He's played very rarely start. Yet he still scored 8 goals and registered 1 assist. That breaks down to an average of about 0.51 goals per 90. It's a good record. He's at Finland, and whether he's going to be playing second fiddle behind Teemu Pukki, that could be the case. He's obviously their star man in attack, but he's shown that he can come onto the pitch and impact games. At 21, he's still really young. If he scores a couple of goals in the tournament, has a strong season in the Premier League, we get to learn more about him, because what I will say is I haven't watched him a ton. What I'm basing this off is his underlying numbers and things I've read elsewhere. I don't know how great of a player he is, but if he develops, he seems like he has the makings of being a good player in the future. So again, it's one that, us included, we'll be keeping an eye on him over the next couple of weeks. And he might only get 3 games because it's unlikely Finland will progress. But if he can do something in them, then it'll be one to watch in the new season when Brentford come up.
Yeah, so I'm sticking with Denmark once more, and again, this player will be someone that I assume most of our listeners will be aware of. This is not an under the radar player, but he's someone who wanted to flag just kind of out of interest above anything else, really. And that is Kasper Dolberg. When he burst onto the scene a few years ago, he was kind of deemed as the next big thing. And he kind of hasn't really done it. I'm not really sure why. I don't specifically follow the Dutch Eredivisie, but when he was 18, he came through Ajax first team, again 18 years old, and he scored 16 in his first season. 15 of those were non-penalty, and he also registered 6 assists. And he was just he was hailed as, you know, a real top prospect and stuff. Following year, he only scored 6. 4 of them were non-penalty and 0 assists. And then he kind of, I think he got injured and stuff, and he scored 11 goals at one point for Ajax, then scored, well, then he moved to Nice. And he's now at Nice. He's doing okay in things. He scored 6 goals this season, 11 goals last season for them. And he's now 23, I think it is. Yeah, 23. So he's just a player that I wanted to flag because a few years back, you know, when an Ajax prospect is bigged up as like a real top player and he's going to make it and all this, they usually do. And I think, although Dolberg hasn't necessarily fell off a cliff, you know, Nice is a decent level, it's still interesting to see maybe why he hasn't hit those heights and why initially, say, you know, coming back to the Liverpool theme, why Liverpool kind of wait for a player to have a few seasons under his belt, lots of minutes under his belt for Liverpool to go on, because it minimises the risk of him essentially being a one-hit wonder. And if Liverpool and any other team could have jumped after that first initial season when he was 18 years old and he scored 16 in the Dutch Eredivisie, but Liverpool usually avoid players who have just burst onto the scene, you know, even the likes of Haaland and Sancho and players like this. It's quite clear that they're really good, but Liverpool usually target players who have got quite a few seasons under the belt. Even the likes of Konate now, you look at Konate, he's only 22, but he's got like 4 big European League seasons under his belt. So it's something that you genuinely want to avoid, really, signing a player who's just burst onto the scene. And I think looking at Dolberg, again, look, although he hasn't done that bad, although he's still doing all right and things, he's probably a good reason as to why you don't initially avoid the hype, maybe. And further along the line, if he's still doing it after quite a few years, then you take the jump then. I think a few teams in the Premier League maybe have been a bit quick in the past to jump on a hype train, only to realise that that's all it was, really.
Yeah, great. Are we on to Group C?
Group C, yeah, we are. So Group C, we have Austria, Netherlands, North Macedonia, and Ukraine. Let you go first.
Just on that, by the way, I've got a sneaky feeling that Ukraine are going to top that group. You know, if anyone's likes a tipple.
I think Austria could do quite well as well. So it'll be interesting to see if Netherlands slip out there.
On the subject of Netherlands, rather than going for one of those sides, I've gone for the Netherlands player. But you know, it's a Liverpool podcast. I couldn't miss the opportunity to talk about a player who's been linked, and that's obviously Donyell Malen. I don't know what more we can add. Really good attacker. Been doing the business in the Eredivisie for a while now, and I guess a flagging because I'm just really interested to see how his abilities translate into, you know, such a really competitive, not only competitive, but pressured environment, because that's what you'd be getting if you were in the Premier League playing week in, week out, especially for the side like Liverpool. I think he only has about 9 caps under his belt, although he's played a lot of football for PSV. He's played over 80 times. He's got a strike rate about 1 in every 2 or something. So he's more than proven himself there. I think if he can go to the European Championships, do well with the Netherlands, then that could, in the same way you have these players who play at weaker leagues but perform really well in Europe, I feel like this is a similar thing. If he can perform really well on an international stage here, then that it probably minimises that risk you were talking about a little bit in terms of how would his abilities translate from somewhere like the Eredivisie to the Premier League.
The issue with that is if you was to do that, you're probably driving the price up at the same time. You know, it's a fact really that any player that does well at an international tournament, his price is as high as it can possibly get in the immediate weeks after.
I agree. And I guess that's a trade-off of it. It just depends whether the club see that as a worthwhile trade-off. Now, having a better understanding of how he perform. If they know, okay, we'll probably have to pay an extra 5-10 million, but he looks like he's going to be worth it in the long run. I don't know, hard to say. But either way, he's going to play at the tournament, isn't he? So they're probably, unless they would have made a move before, the hands are tied a little bit in that sense.
Yeah, so I'm going to steer away from Holland, but before I do, I'd like to flag that, long-term listeners of the show, listeners from a few weeks back, in fact, Toon Koopmeiners is going to be playing for Holland. He's a player that I mentioned a few weeks back, so keep an eye on him. He's actually been linked in the past few days to Atalanta, so it'll be interesting to see if that one actually materialises. But again, if you're watching Holland, Koopmeiners is the big 6 foot lad who can kind of do everything in the middle of the park there, so keep an eye on him. But I'm going to go to Austria and I'm going to talk about Xavier Schlager. Hopefully I've said that right. He played against England recently and he put in a few aggressive tackles, let's say that. But he doesn't look as young as he is. He looked when he was playing, he looked about 40. But if you actually look at his age, he's only 23. Currently playing for sorry, he's playing for Wolfsburg. I thought it was Mönchengladbach for some reason there, but he came from RB Salzburg, Red Bull Salzburg, and we know the links with Liverpool and the Red Bull clubs. There's a reason Liverpool are linked with those players, because they execute a specific brand of football. They tick the clock boxes essentially. And Schlager, although he might not reach Liverpool level, he's a good player. I like watching him. Really aggressive, good at the whole pressing side of things without the ball. Likes to have a shot every now and then as well, considering his position in midfield. And yeah, he's just a player that I wouldn't be surprised if he moved to the Premier League. He seems suited to the Premier League, but maybe not Liverpool level. So if you're going to play such a pressing style of football, maybe like a Southampton, maybe possibly even a little bit higher. But he's a player who to keep an eye on, and I think supporters of England listening to this podcast will probably be aware of him on the back of his performance against us a few days ago.
Yeah, I've gone for a central defender next, Ukraine, and this is a player that I've cheated a little bit because I've written about them recently and I've watched them a little bit via Wisecout. So I got a picture of the player and looks a good player, and that's, I'll take your time on this pronunciation, Illya Zabarnyi, I think it is. It's spelled Zabarnyi. 20-year-old. What's really impressed is he's only 20 and he's been a regular in Dynamo Kiev's defence this season, and he's by all accounts really impressed. He looks solid in the numbers, and he just possesses traits that you'd value in a defender. He's tall, over 6'1", strong, but seems quite mobile as well. I said I watched a little bit of him and he seems to do fairly well in duels. Whether that be 1v1 or getting dragged out wide, he doesn't seem to overcommit. Seems quite composed. Just a good defender. And ironically, I noticed he's had a few links with I think it might be someone like Chelsea recently over the last week. So he's clearly doing something right. And again, it's really difficult for us to predict whether he's going to be in the starting 11 or he's going to be used sparingly. But Ukraine have had a decent kind of defensive setup for the last 12 months or so. I know they've not conceded many goals over the last few internationals, and that'll probably do him good if he is coming to that side. He's just a player to watch. Dynamo Kiev are low-key a club who seem to produce a lot of really good players, and maybe this might be one of the next generation.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Ukraine do actually. But I'm sticking with Austria again. So I'm going to go for Christoph Baumgartner. Still really young, just 21. But he looks good. He looks like he's got a move on the horizon. Still contracted till 2025, so that move probably isn't going to come soon. That's a Hoffenheim. But as I said, 21 years old, and he's a midfield player. A little bit more, but he's a bit more offensive minded, and that shows up in his returns really. So despite playing in midfield this season in the Bundesliga, he scored 6, assisted 3, and last season he scored 7, assisted 2. So he's kind of that midfield player, despite his age. He's kind of that midfield player who, and that's league only, by the way. So he chipped in a few in the Europa League, I think. But he's kind of that player who, each season in the league, he's probably going to contribute, despite his deeper position, between 8 and 10 goals a season, something like that. And in addition to that, he's really, really good. Well, he's really active on the defensive side, despite his offensive characteristics. Keen presser of the ball. You know, he ranks right up there for his defensive pressures, and keen, you know, when it comes to tackles and blocks and all that sort of stuff. So he did play against England the other day. He was one of the few who had a few shots, I think, from outside the box. I think Austria generally struggled to generate much, but he was one of the threats. Hasn't been injured much in his career. And he's a player that I think moving forward, those teams that want to add a few goals from midfield, he looks like that type of player. To be honest, he looks like he's going to be able to do it. But you know, this is kind of his second season, I suppose, at a top level, in terms of getting quite a few minutes. And I think if he was to do it again, and maybe once more, that's kind of again that 4-season thing under his belt. I wouldn't be surprised if he got a move to a higher team. So yeah, one to keep an eye on. And again, Dave, I'm gonna quietly tip Austria, I think, to do fairly well.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I wasn't really eyeing Austria up as a dark horse, but you know, I must say, Josh, I'll always take your opinion on its merit. So you know, I'll maybe give them a little bit more faith now.
Yeah, I don't know about the dark horse. I don't think they'll win it. I just mean, I don't know, just get a bit further than people think. Yeah. So we'll go to Group D now. England's group, funny enough. So we've got England, we've got Scotland, Croatia, and the Czech Republic. So Dave, I'll let you start. I'm going to say, by the way, in terms of scouting picks, I would be surprised if we don't have the same player at least once here. I'll be disappointed, Dave, to be honest.
Well, yeah, because I don't think I've gone very straightforward. The first player I've got.
I'm going to say there's a lad I've got who is. What I was speaking before about hype trains. He's kind of got a bit of hype around him at the minute, and I think it's kind of justified as well. So we'll see if we've got him anyway.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we won't, because I have an idea who you mean, and I haven't got them. I'll start with Croatia, and the player that's actually played in the Premier League. A player I know quite well, and maybe some listeners will have an idea of, or at least remember. And that's Croatia's Nikola Vlasic. He's a player that I think is a really good footballer.
Do you know what, Dave? I was going to flag him myself, and the reason I was going to flag him is from an Everton perspective, because for whatever reason, it didn't work. But I think when Everton picked him up, I think they just played against him, hadn't they, a few weeks earlier? And I think I remember watching the game, and he did really well. And I think he's since done quite well, hasn't
he? Yeah, he has. And I think the issue was he comes in as a 19-year-old, an attacking midfielder, although he's very versatile. But, you know, say on paper, a traditional kind of number 10 type. And Everton notoriously brought in about 22 of them that summer. You know, Rooney come in and he wants to play that position. Klaassen comes in playing that position. And he never really got a look in. He didn't really have the faith of the management, although it was quite a turbulent campaign anyway for them. He ends up, I think he has a loan move, then he ends up going to CSKA Moscow. But, you know, he looked a very good player when he was featuring for Everton, and now he's gone over there and he's been fantastic. He really has. And I'm just having a quick, I only brought his numbers up very quickly now, but, you know, averaging, bear in mind he's not a striker, So like 0.4 goals per 90, 0.2 per 90. Assists, underlying numbers support it. Very skillful, lots of dribbling. 7.2 dribbles per 90, 60% success rate. His underlying numbers are good, but also when you watch him, you see he's a good player. And I think of the players that Everton brought in and sold, he's the one they should be regretting. And a Premier League club, in my opinion, should go back in for him, because I think he's a really good player that brings a lot of output in the final third. So he's a player I really like. He's still just 23, so I expect him to have a good tournament, and I do expect another move out of him in the next year or two, maybe back to England.
Yeah, it's interesting that around a similar period, Everton got Vlasic and Lookman on the books, and for whatever reason, both of them, didn't really pan out as expected. But two players that look like they've got bags of potential to the game and certainly a high ceiling to reach. So
such a well-run club, Everton.
So I'm gonna go with the player that I expected you to have. Maybe you haven't, but it is Adam Hlozček.
Yeah, I didn't do. Sorry.
Okay, so he is 18 years old, striker for Sparta Prague. He's obviously representing the Czech Republic in the tournament. And this season, despite his age, he's scored 15 league goals and assisted 7. And I think 14 of those goals were non-penalty. So, clearly got lots of potential, lots of hype around him. Linked strongly with a move to West Ham, which is probably no surprise considering their recent capture of Souček and Soufal, both from Sparta Prague. I think I'm right in saying, certainly from that league. Sometimes I get mixed up with some of them, but again, 18 years old, but he's he's around 6'1", and looks decent with both feet. Good finisher. Maybe he's overperformed a little bit, and again, the fact that he's only been on the scene, well, not very long, is probably a reason as to why West Ham would take a punt, whereas a team with maybe higher ambitions would wait for him to do it a bit more. But if West Ham get him and he was to showcase good form, they could really get some kind of return on an investment there in terms of gold in the Premier League, and then probably a big fee for the services. And I thought it was interesting that in his most recent game, I think it was about 10 days ago in his domestic league, he played the first 45 minutes and then came off, which I'm assuming was for international reasons. But in that 45-minute period, he scored 4.
Yeah.
I think one was the penalty. I think that was when the penalty came, actually. But yeah, he looks like a really well-rounded forward who might have a good tournament, might have a bit of a Milan Baros tournament, to be honest. He looks full of potential.
Yeah, on him, sorry, I was just going to say, I was trying to think why I'd written about him recently, albeit I'd written for him for potentially United as someone maybe they keep an eye on, so that's probably a push. But yeah, I was trying to remember where it was. I just brought it up now, and yeah, the 8 assists plus 4 second assists, like he just seems to create as well, doesn't he? He's not just a goal scorer; he seems to create for those around him. So yeah, these are definitely an interest. I thought he'd actually been. Well, I'd put in here that he'd been linked with Liverpool sensitively. I don't know if you'd seen them.
Yeah, I've got that written down. I've seen it, but I haven't seen it, big. I haven't seen like big links. So I don't know if there's anything in that one, but I think there's certainly something in the West Ham links, given Souček and Soufal both came from that division, I think.
Yeah, he's one to watch. He could be a player that we talk about more in depth over the next year or so. Yeah, the reason I flagged this next player was because there's an interesting story behind it, and that's Michael Edwards, whose parent club is PSV. He's playing for Czech Republic, but he's been actually on loan in the Czech Republic this season with one of the top clubs that I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I'll try and check it in a minute. But he played well in the under-21 championships, and he got called up to the senior squad for the Euro 2020. So he's the only player to actually compete in both, which is a testament to him. I think he comes in at the expense of someone who had to drop out, but I think it's a testament to himself that he makes the squad. And yeah, wrote a little bit about him. He just looks a really good player. Looks like I think he's very versatile. He's being used as like a number 6 box-to-box attacking midfielder, even as a centre forward on occasions. And I don't know about you, Josh, but I always find if you're one of these players who gets used everywhere, chances are you're probably the best player in the side, and you can be put anywhere and really influence things. So I think that's a good sign with him. And yeah, he's just a player that I've got a feeling that he may just kind of come in and do a good job and make a name for himself. Said it didn't quite work out initially with PSV, but I think he's set to go back there. He's set to play a part there as well. So probably won't. He's still only 22. Might not see much of him over the next year or two, but maybe a bit further down the line, he could be the type of midfielder that comes over to England and has a good career. So yeah, just someone to keep an eye on. Michael Sadler.
Yeah. So my next one is a bit of a cheat, to be honest, because I'm going to briefly flag 2 players, and the reason for that is because I've flagged them before on this podcast, both Croatian and both centre backs. So, firstly I think his first name was Josko, and then his surname Gvardiol. Mentioned him fairly recently, Dave, in the scouting picks. Recently moved to RB Leipzig, seems to be replacing the presences of Ibrahima Konate and Dayot Upamecano, who were both leaving. But he got picked up from, I think it was Zagreb, and still 19, left-footed centre-back. So he was one to keep an eye on that I thought I'd mentioned a few weeks back. He's going to be representing Croatia, but probably from the bench more often than not. And the lad who's going to be starting against England, I think, in the first game as well, is going to be Caleta-Car, who obviously we mentioned a few months back in reference to Liverpool as potentially a signing for the club to make in January, and Liverpool actually went and tried to make the signing, albeit very, very late, to the extent that it didn't end up going through because Marseille couldn't get a replacement. But he's a player that I thought very much fitted the Liverpool style of defending. Again, he's got a past at RB Salzburg and decent passing range, really physical, good in the air. Really good in the air, actually. I think he might have finished top of League One for aerial dual success. And still fairly young. I think he was around 24 when I last checked. 24 years old, 6'2". So, again, England are going to be playing this player. Harry Kane's going to be coming against him. So, just keep an eye on him because Liverpool were really, really close to getting him up until them finally opting for Konate instead, it seems. So, yeah, 2 players, 2 centre-backs there for Croatia that I thought were very, very relevant to Analysing Anfield. That's also I'd mention. So next, Dave, Group E, and we have Poland, Slovakia, Spain, and Sweden.
Okay, just like quickly, Caleta-Car, so he's getting linked with West Ham, by the way, which I thought was interesting.
That is an interesting one.
Yeah. I wasn't expecting it. Yeah, quite straightforward. I'll start with a very straightforward one. Again, I'm not bringing anything new to the table here. I just want to make a general point. Ferran Torres, I think it could be really interesting to see how he does at the tournament because I've been thinking about him a lot the last few weeks, I should say. I'm just thinking he looks an immense talent that sounds silly given the money that was paid for him, given he's at one of the biggest clubs in Europe. In terms of ability right now, I'm not talking about anything else. Don't want anyone getting worked up. But in Manchester City, and it kind of feels like it doesn't get as much traction as you'd expect. And I think it's because they've got so much talent in the side and the way Pep's used them kind of sparingly. But if he could have a really good tournament here, I think he could go up a level in stature and probably in the estimations of his role with Guardiola and at City. And I think he could low-key be a really big player in the Premier League next season, which obviously isn't good news for Liverpool, but just from a wider perspective, taking the Liverpool hat off at the moment and just looking at it objectively, I think he could go on to be a strong player next season. I think a good tournament here would kind of be the launching pad for that.
Yeah, I think Guardiola's actually spoke quietly about maybe he's going to be used as a striker moving forward, because he has shown an ability to put the ball in the back of the net. He's shown an ability to thrive in and around the penalty box as opposed to maybe progressing the ball as much. So, yeah, he's an interesting player, and I think moving forward it'll be interesting to see how Guardiola uses him, because he's obviously got a history of using players as best as they possibly can be used. So it'll be interesting if after working with him for 12 months he deems his best position to be as a striker. He was your pick, wasn't he, Dave? Yeah, so I'm going to go for a lad who's also in the Premier League, drifting under the radar a little bit, hasn't made as much of an impact yet, but it is Jakub Moder. So
that's our first. We've done quite well, to be fair.
It was inevitable, wasn't it, to be honest?
Yeah.
But yeah, he's interesting, isn't he? He plays for Brighton, for those who aren't aware, and he only started making real appearances towards the back end of the season, I think. Still only 22 years old, and he was bought from Lech Poznan in October 2020, so not that long ago, for about 10 million. And one of the interesting things about him is he doesn't seem to have a position. He's 22 years old. He plays absolutely everywhere. For Brighton this season, in his few appearances, I think he played left wing back, right wing back, as an offensive midfielder, as a standard central midfielder. He seems to play everywhere. And at Lech Poznan, just before he moved, he started 14 times, scored 4 and assisted 2. And the season before, he started 15 times, scored 5 and assisted 4. And when I've seen him play, I think I watched his debut, I think he had like 4 shots in 20 minutes in his first 20 minutes. So he looks like a really interesting, weird player, and Brighton tend to pick those up as well. So, it'll be interesting to see how he gets on and whether he plays a more central role next season, Dave.
Yeah, these are I'll be honest, it wasn't a transfer when it happened I took much interest into, but I imagine we may follow the same person, Albion Analytics, the Brighton fan. On Twitter. Then I saw him tweet about him once or twice. He's someone I looked into, and he looks really interesting as a player, really unique. I guess if a lazy comparison would be like I'm trying to think.
One thing I thought was interesting with him was he's quite tall, isn't he? He's 6 foot 2.
He's over 6'1". I was 6 foot. I was good. Well, I said over 6'1", so yeah, same thing. Yeah, he's really tall, but he does seem to be a really good technical player. He seems to have good understanding, good movements and stuff.
He's quite mobile as well, despite his height. So again, really odd player, I suppose. But in a way, typical Brighton when it comes to recruitment, and it'll be interesting to see how he does moving forward.
Yeah. You'll have to double up, mate. You have to go again.
So I'll go with a player who, again, I think we've mentioned on this podcast before, but he's difficult to overlook, especially when it comes to this tournament. So it's Alexander Isak. We spoke about him before again, but 6'2", really interesting player, and he did move to Borussia Dortmund initially, and that was because of his potential. Dortmund are really quick to pick up these players. When I said earlier that Liverpool tend to give a player plenty of minutes before committing, Dortmund take the risk very, very quickly. They do it with, Sancho, Bellingham, Isak. But in Isak's case, for whatever reason, it didn't really work particularly well at Dortmund. And he's now at Sociedad. I think he's permanently at Sociedad now after being loaned out once or twice. Only 21 years old now. He moved to Dortmund when he was really young. But in the season just finished in La Liga, he scored 17 goals without a single penalty. Also assisted 2. So, and I've seen links in recent days with Arsenal as well, which I thought was interesting. He just seems to be quite a well-rounded forward, especially for his age, scoring plenty of goals there in La Liga, good in the air and things. And considering what he's got to his game now at the age of 21, I think he's one to keep an eye on. Say, for example, when he gets to the age of 25 and he's got like another 4 years under his belt of development, as long as that's happened at the right place, he's got quite a high ceiling, I think. And given the season that he's just had, if Sweden do okay, they've got a group that I think presents them with a platform to do okay. He could be one of the what's the word, like the rookies of the tournament, maybe, who ends up doing fairly well, maybe chasing down the golden boot even, to be honest.
Yeah, he's someone who I think could kind of one day replace Firmino. I think he's that type. He could be that good of a player. Where, I mean, still early days, isn't it? I think there's talked about it about half an hour ago about the waiting to get those big minutes under the belt at big leagues. We'll see if he can do that first. But yeah, I think he's got the potential for that. I definitely think a Premier League club will be looking to make a move, maybe even this summer, to be honest.
Yeah, so we will move on to the group of death, Dave. We have France.
What a group.
Yeah. We have France, Germany, Portugal, and the mighty Hungary as well. So it'll be interesting to see who comes through in that one. But plenty of talent to choose from, Dave.
Yeah, I've gone with a play that we've talked about on this before, but I still think he's worth bringing up again because getting overlooked. Now a league champion, I might add, and that's Renato Sanchez. Obviously, he's a former wonder kid, isn't he? A player with a huge reputation at a very young age. And he looked as if he was on the path to being a nearly man, a player, big reputation, didn't fulfill it. But I think over the last couple of years, Josh, he's quietly kind of shown that he can, and he's become an important player. Certainly, he's done really well with Lille. I'm not entirely sure how much if he's a regular fitting within the Portuguese side. Although I know he did start against Spain, so I'd assume so. Bring up his data. Yeah, he started against Spain, started and played a full 90 against Luxembourg. And I still think he's a player with a tremendously high ceiling. And at 23, he's nowhere near his prime yet. So Lille are notoriously a club who tend to do really well in bringing players in, bringing them on and developing them as players, and then obviously selling them for the profit. On that basis, he's another player who I think could have another move in him in the next year or two.
Yeah, so I was going to go with Kylian Mbappe, but I thought it was a bit obvious. So I moved away and went for Germany. So this is a player who has actually been fairly strongly linked to Liverpool in the past couple of months, past half season, really. But we haven't spoken about him once on this podcast. And I haven't looked into him, really, either. It is Florian Neuhaus, I think is how you say it. He looks like an interesting player, and as I said, he's been linked fairly strongly for most of the season. Only 24 years old, so he's kind of had that development behind him, but he's now getting to that point where maybe he's ready to deliver in his career. German, as I said, 6'1", so he's a good height. Still at Mönchengladbach, so he's playing alongside Denis Zakaria from earlier on. And he's a midfield player who can play in a number of positions. I think he predominantly plays in centre midfield, but every now and then moves a bit further forward into, I suppose, a number 10 type zone. And as a result of that, every now and then, his return is decent. He's capable of offering a few goals and assists from midfield. In the season just finished in the Bundesliga alone, he scored 6, assisted 5, which is a decent return. Last season, scored 4, assisted 2. Season before, scored 3, assisted 8. And season before that, scored 6, assisted 1. And obviously, what I've just said there, you probably get the vibe that he's got a fair few minutes behind him, which again is a big Liverpool thing. If they're going to commit to a sign, you want lots of data behind him, ideally. And he's played at least 2,000 league minutes in each of the past 4 seasons. Actually, scratch that. He's played at least 2,000 Bundesliga minutes in each of the past 3 seasons. The 4th season, he was at Dusseldorf in the Bundesliga too. So I doubt Liverpool will have the desirable data for that one. But yeah, he just looks like an interesting player, actually. Look, I wouldn't rule him out. You know, the fact that it's been linked and stuff, sometimes you can say, oh, no chance. But I wouldn't rule this one out. He looks like a good progressor to the ball in terms of moving the ball from A to B. And he can do it through passing and through carrying as well. His pressing numbers aren't the highest. Whether that's a stylistic thing with Gladbach, I'm not sure. But he doesn't press a great deal. But that was the same with Wijnaldum. You know, Wijnaldum, for whatever reason, didn't show up as a very keen presser of the ball. And I think it's interesting as well. He's never injured. His last injury was 2017. Obviously, it's 2021 now. So, yeah, it's one to keep an eye on. Liverpool, you could argue, were in the market for a midfielder of that type, really. You know, I mentioned last week on the transfers pod that we could do with signing an 8/10 type player who contributes goals and assists. You know, I've just described one there, really. So he's going to be an interesting one to follow in the tournament. Whether he starts for the side as complete as Germany, I'm not sure, because you've got the likes of Gundogan in the midfield there, but he's a player that has been linked with Liverpool, and if something was to come of that, I wouldn't be that surprised. I'd like to look at him even deeper than I have for this podcast, but just on the face of it, he looks interesting.
Yeah. I've finished actually on a Hungary player, which is quite funny because they're more than likely only going to play 3 games. But when we were doing a bit of prep work, putting some names down on the list, I couldn't see that much that people wouldn't really know in terms of those 3 big nations. So I looked at Hungary, and there's a player that ironically was spotted being linked with Leicester recently, and Leicester's recruitment has been pretty blob on for a little while now. And it was a central defender / sometimes left back. Let me just not butcher this pronunciation, Josh. Attila Szalai, spelt Szalai. 23 years old, 6'4", really good size. Predominantly tends to play as like a left centre back in, sometimes back 4, sometimes back 3. But just got a really good traits you like in central defender. I had a quick look at his numbers before the show. Fairly average aerial duel considering his height. It was only about maybe 52-53% success rate last season, which seems low, but there could be reasons behind that. I won't just make sweeping assumptions on it. Defensive duel success rate just below 70%, which is really good. It just seems to be a really strong defender who's highly rated. Not someone I've watched, but someone I did read about recently. Hence why he come to my mind when we were prepping for the show. He's almost certain he's going to start for Hungary, so we're going to get a look at him. And considering the clubs he's being linked with, he's an interesting player. I'm looking at his career history. He started at Rapid Vienna, goes out to Apollon, I think it's in Cyprus, and then he moves to Fenerbahce, and that's where he is now, obviously competing in the Turkish Superliga. So he's a player who's kind of climbed through the ranks a little bit in terms of competitiveness of divisions. Looks to be an important player despite his age for Hungary, and when you get linked to the likes of Leicester, AC Milan as well, I think there's evidence there to say that those people who've watched him more than say we have look beyond the numbers. There's clearly a really good player in there, and for that reason, I think he's going to be one to maybe put on everyone's radar now before he maybe explodes in a year or 2.
Yeah, interesting shout. He's another one that's just slipped under my radar. I'm not aware of him. But for me, again, this group was tough because most players, especially the ones who were going to start, everyone will have heard of, really. So I'm going to quickly mention, this isn't my pick because it's not really fair, is it? Because I mentioned them last week. But Pedro Goncalves is part of the Portuguese team. Well, the squad at least. I mentioned him last week in terms of how he's just kind of exploded a little bit this season. I think I said he scored, I think it was 23 goals in the Portuguese top division this season. Despite his age, I think he was quite young as well. So he's one to watch. I think he's probably going to start from the bench most of the time, but you never know in these tournaments when a player starts playing well. Sometimes he just forces his way in. So he's one to keep an eye on, see if he does well. But the player I'm going to mention, again, he's going to be someone that everyone will be aware of, I'm sure. And despite that, he's not going to start, I don't think. French centre-back, and it is Jules Koundé. He seems to have Rafa Varane and Kimpembe ahead of him in the French ranks. So it doesn't look like he's going to start. But he's been strongly linked with moves to the Premier League from Sevilla, which is where he currently is. He's been linked strongly with Manchester City last season. I think they actually wanted him above Diaz. I think they seemed to bid for him first. Didn't really go anywhere. He got linked with Man United, getting linked with Arsenal. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for the links because he seems to be, despite the fact he's a centre-back, he seems to be incredibly attacking. And he's only 22 as well. And he's only 5'10", so he's not massive. But despite that, he's a huge threat. He's especially from set pieces. Really good in the air. So he's only scored 2 this season, but assisted 1. 2 goals and 1 assist from a centre back is not that bad. And his aerial success was decent. But in terms of just doing attacking things, like if you look at FBref and look at where he ranks in certain areas for what he does compared to other centre backs, he shoots a lot for the average centre back, generates scoring opportunities a lot more than the average centre back, dribbles more than anyone in central defence, carries the ball, plays progressive passes. So in terms of
just on that, Josh, sorry, just quickly, that's what I see when I think of a play. I see him kind of stepping out, having that confidence to step out and disrupt the setup and pull players out of position, create spaces elsewhere. I think that's a really good asset of his.
Yeah, he just seems to have naturally offensive qualities, despite obviously playing as a centre-back. And I think any team wanting to play in an attacking way would benefit from adding a player like that. The likes of Arsenal, City and teams like that. Liverpool obviously haven't been linked because of his price. He's getting quoted over 60 million and stuff like that for the services. But again, going back to FBref have a tool now on their site. They look purely at a player's numbers and they will compare that player to other statistical comparisons. So players who, without FBref obviously watching any of this player play, they would compare them to players who look statistically comparable. And the biggest link, the top link to Jules Koundé over the past 12 months is Harry Maguire. And if you think of how Harry Maguire plays, I'd fit him in that mould again. I think he's obviously got his flaws, but he's very, very attacking for a centre-back. Offers big perks from set pieces, carries the ball a lot out of defence and things. And the third most comparable link to Jules Koundé is Sergio Ramos, who again, really, really attacking for a centre-back. So I don't think he'll play for France, so I'm not really sure why I'm flagging him, but he's just a really interesting player that I wouldn't be surprised if he eventually arrives in the Premier League because of what he's doing. Really different to the typical centre-back. So we'll leave it there anyway, Dave. This was supposed to be a shorter pod, and we've gone over the hour.
Producers will not be happy, so apologies in the background to them listening.
They definitely won't. Before we round up, Dave, Euro 2020 winner, who is it?
Josh, put me on it there. At the moment, I am struggling to look past France. I hate being a bore and going for the favourites, but I just think they still look a really good, well balanced squad. So I'm going to go with them. Sorry to be boring, everyone.
No, I'm going to go with France myself. I think the squad's really good, and bottom line, I've got N'Golo Kante. So, but yeah, we'll be back next week anyway. So, Dave, thanks for joining us, mate.
Thank you, mate. Cheers, everyone.
Yeah, and we will be back next week. So, do tune in. See you then.